The Persecution of the Early Church, a Journey Through Fire and Faith. Welcome back to Sacred Scrolls. Today we are diving deep into one of the most intense and awe-inspiring chapters of church history, the story of the persecuted early church. But this isn't just a 10-minute summary. This is a journey, a documentary, a full-length immersion into the trials, triumphs, and transformation of the early Christian movement. Over the next several chapters, you'll learn how ordinary people with extraordinary faith stood firm in the face of imperial wrath, brutal violence, and overwhelming odds. This is more than a history lesson. It has a tribute to the fire of belief that shaped the world we live in today. From the upper room in Jerusalem to the catacombs of Rome, from the cries of Stephen to the silence of underground churches, this is the untold epic of faith under fire. Let's begin. If you're passionate about church history and faith that stands unshaken, go ahead and like this video, share it with a friend, and hit that subscribe button. Chapter 1. Jerusalem, the Spark of Suffering. The story of persecution doesn't begin with emperors or arenas. It begins in Jerusalem with fire from heaven and then fire from men. He was crucified, yes, but his followers now claim he's alive. And more than that, they say they've received his spirit. A sound like rushing wind fills the room. Tongues of fire settle on the heads of disciples. They burst out into the streets, speaking languages they never learned. A crowd gathers. Peter, the same man who once denied Jesus, now speaks boldly. The apostles are preaching about a crucified Messiah and worse, claiming he rose from the dead. That message, if true, would upend everything. The authorities arrest the apostles and warn them to stop. He calls out the sins of the people, proclaims the resurrection, and offers forgiveness through Jesus. It's 33 AD. They're in Jerusalem, still buzzes with rumors about the man called Jesus. They go right back to preaching, for we cannot but speak of what we have seen and heard. Pentecost changes everything. 3,000 people are baptized that day. They break bread. They pray. They sell their possessions to help each other. The apostles continue to perform miracles. They accuse him of blasphemy, just as they did Jesus. He is dragged before the Sanhedrin. The message is unstoppable, but not everyone is celebrating. As he dies, he echoes his Lord. Lord, do not hold this sin against them. He recounts Israel's history, showing how their ancestors consistently rejected God's messengers. Zealous for the law, Saul sees Christianity as a heresy and a threat. He begins hunting Christians entering homes, arresting men and women, sending many to prison. Then he accuses the council of murdering the righteous one, Jesus. They plant seeds in cities, villages, and ports. Antioch, Caesarea, Damascus. Even Rome begins to hear whispers of this new faith. He is appointed a deacon to help distribute food, but he quickly becomes a powerful preacher. But while the gospel quietly transforms lives in house churches, Rome is about to be shaken by an event that will change the course of church history. The church is born not in quiet, but in power, not in hiding, but in boldness. Fueled by dry summer winds and flammable wooden homes, the blaze rages out of control for 6 days. When the smoke finally clears, 10 of Rome's 14 districts are damaged. 3 are completely destroyed. The early believers begin meeting daily in homes and at the temple. The fire conveniently cleared land for his ambitions, including the construction of the lavish Domus Aurea at his golden house. Tension in the temple. Stephen, filled with the Spirit, looks up and says, "Behold, I see the heavens opened, and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God." The same council that condemned Jesus now watches in frustration. Soon, Peter and John heal a man born lame at the temple gate. A crowd forms. Peter preaches again. More are converted. Entire families were arrested. Children, the elderly, slaves, and freemen, no one was spared. Rumors swirled that they practiced cannibalism born of misunderstandings about the Eucharist. Their values made them outsiders. Their allegiance to a crucified Jew made them suspicious. At night, Christians were dipped in oil or wax, mounted on poles, and set alight to illuminate his banquets. Their reply? Whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you rather than to God, you must judge. Miracles continue. The church grows. The Sanhedrin grows angrier. They arrest the apostles again. This time an angel frees them from prison. Fearing dishonor and dying like his Lord, he requested to be crucified upside down. As a Roman citizen, he was spared crucifixion and instead beheaded on the road outside Rome. His letters would go on to form the theological backbone of the New Testament. He was buried on the Vatican Hill, a spot that would one day become the heart of the Catholic world. The pressure is mounting. Tacitus, a Roman historian who was no friend to Christians, still described the horror with disdain, often in secret, sometimes in tombs beneath the city. They developed symbols like the fish and anchor to identify one another and express their hope. Enter Stephen. The gospel advanced through whispers, courage, and testimony. Among the new leaders in the church is Stephen, a man full of faith in the Holy Spirit. What started as one emperor's attempt to dodge blame would become a pattern repeated for centuries. Stephen debates with members of various Jewish synagogues. None can stand against his wisdom, so they resort to lies. Stephen preaches one last sermon. They are enraged. They gnash their teeth. And beyond continued to pressure the church, and how the courage of believers only deepened in response. They rush him, drag him out of the city, and stone him to death. The first martyr is dead, and something dark has begun. Saul's fury among those holding the coats of the murderers is a young man named Saul. The persecution is intense. Believers flee Jerusalem in every direction, Judea, Samaria, and beyond. But here's the twist. Persecution doesn't weaken the church. It spreads it. Everywhere these believers go, they share the story of Jesus. The flame that began in Jerusalem is now spreading across the empire. Chapter 2. The Fire and the Emperor Nero's Rome. It is now the year 64 as Christianity has begun to reach the heart of the Roman Empire, Rome itself. In July of that year, a fire breaks out in the city. Whispers fill the streets. Suspicion begins to circle. Many believe the fire was not accidental, and fingers begin to point at the emperor himself, Nero, the blame game Nero, whose appetite for grandeur knew no limits, had long wanted to remodel parts of the city to fit his grand vision. Faced with mounting public outrage, Nero needed a scapegoat, and he found one: the Christians. They were already disliked. They refused to worship the Roman gods or honor the emperor as divine. They met in secret. Nero's declaration set off the first major imperial persecution of Christians in Rome. The spectacle of death, what followed was brutality almost unmatched in the ancient world. Christians were rounded up, interrogated, and tortured until they named others. Some were sewn into animal skins and torn apart by wild dogs in public arenas. Others were crucified, left to die slowly and in agony. And then there were Nero's garden parties, a church leader's final days. According to tradition, it was during this wave of terror that two of Christianity's most important figures met their deaths, the apostles Peter and Paul. Peter, the bold and brash fisherman turned shepherd, was reportedly arrested and condemned. Paul, the brilliant former Pharisee turned missionary, was also arrested. Their deaths did not end the movement. If anything, they ignited it further. Faith in the fire. In the aftermath of Nero's madness, Christians continued to meet. Faith spread not because of political power, but in spite of political terror. The church had faced local opposition in Jerusalem, but now, for the first time, it faced imperial persecution, and it would not be the last time. Nero's brutal legacy cemented a dangerous precedent that Christians could be used as a political target. In the next chapter, we'll explore how the emperors who followed Domitian, Trajan. Chapter 3, Domitian to Decius, Testing the Faith. The blood of the martyrs did not dry in the Colosseum. It soaked deep into the soul of the Roman Empire, challenging it in ways the Caesars could never have anticipated. It is a period marked by suffering, but also by courage, creativity, and expansion. After Nero, persecution became sporadic but methodical, defined not by the chaos of one man's insanity. He demanded that subjects worship him as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. Domitian's paranoia only deepened the crisis. According to early church writers, including Eusebius and Tertullian, many were executed or exiled, including members of the imperial household. For many Romans, this was an extension of imperial cult practices. But for Christians, it was blasphemy. But by a political effort to preserve Roman religion and culture against the disruptive rise of Christianity. In this chapter, we examine nearly 150 years of imperial policy, Christian resistance, and growing theological boldness. There, he received the apocalyptic visions that became the book of Revelation, written to 7 churches under pressure and threat. Domitian's demand for worship. When Emperor Domitian ascended the throne in 81 AD1, he inherited an empire stable in power but fragile in unity. Those who refused to honor the emperor with sacrifices or public reverence were branded as traitors. It was under Domitian that the Apostle John, now an old man, was exiled to the island of Patmos. Christian gatherings remained illegal. Informers could trigger investigations. Martyrdoms increased. The message was clear: endure. Christ reigns. Babylon will fall. Trajan and the official persecution protocol. Domitian's death brought temporary relief, but a new chapter opened under Trajan, and spoke vividly of his desire to die for the faith. During his journey, he wrote 7 letters to churches across Asia Minor. His bones, according to tradition, were collected by believers and honored as relics. I am the wheat of God, and I am ground by the teeth of the wild beasts, so that I may be found the pure bread of Christ. These letters remain some of the earliest and most treasured Christian writings outside the New Testament. Trajan was a capable administrator, but his rule cemented a legal precedent for dealing with Christians. In a famous correspondence between Pliny the Younger and Emperor Trajan, we see the framework. In his 80s, he was arrested and brought before the authorities. Ordered to curse Christ and live, he responded, "How then can I blaspheme my king and Savior. Christians were not to be actively hunted. If accused, they must be tried. Under his reign, persecution increased, particularly in Gaul. He saw it as irrational and subversive. Her courage reportedly strengthened many. According to Eusebius, some were exposed to wild beasts, others to fire or the sword. Blandina, a young slave girl, endured repeated torture but refused to renounce her faith. His first apology addressed Emperor Antoninus Pius, arguing that Christians were moral, loyal, and intellectually rigorous. He exposed the fallacies in pagan myths and emphasized the transformative power of Christ. Those who denied Christ and sacrificed to Roman gods were to be released. Those who refused were to be executed. This legal policy seems moderate, but in practice it enabled ongoing persecution across the empire. Tertullian, an African theologian from Carthage, penned treatises defending Christian morality, refuting heresies, and rejecting the imperial cult. It was during this time that Ignatius of Antioch, one of the most passionate voices of early Christianity, was arrested. Eventually, he was arrested under Emperor Marcus Aurelius and martyred, earning him the name by which he is known today. The Journey of Ignatius. Ignatius, bishop of Antioch and a disciple of the Apostle John, was taken under guard from Syria to Rome to face execution. Ignatius urged believers to remain unified under their bishops, warned against heresies like Docetism. Let me be food for the wild beasts, through whom I can reach God. In Rome, Ignatius was reportedly thrown to lions in the arena. Hadrian to Marcus Aurelius. Intellectual defense and martyrdom. Hadrian issued some protections for Christians, ordering that false accusations should not lead to automatic punishment. Yet persecution continued locally. This was also the era when Christian apologists began to rise. Justin Martyr, a philosopher turned Christian, boldly defended the faith before Roman audiences. Justin established a school in Rome where he taught and debated. Another key martyr of this time was Polycarp, the bishop of Smyrna. 86 years have I served him, and he has done me no wrong. He was burned at the stake, and according to eyewitnesses, the flames formed an arch around him, his body untouched by fire until pierced by a blade, rising opposition from philosophers and emperors. Marcus Aurelius, though a Stoic philosopher, was no friend to Christianity. The martyrs of Lyon and Vienna community of Christians faced horrific torture. The 3rd century, Tertullian and theological boldness. By the early 3rd century, Christian thought became increasingly bold and sophisticated. His words still ring today. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. In treatises like Apologeticus, he mocked Roman inconsistencies. You say we are criminals, yet we are the ones who refuse to kill, steal, or commit adultery. You fear us, yet your prisons are filled with everyone but us. Tertullian also helped develop early Trinitarian theology, long before Nicaea. Underground church life, the catacombs. While the apologists wrote for the world, ordinary Christians worshipped in secret. Public gatherings were risky. Homes became churches. Graveyards became sanctuaries. These served not only to bury their dead, but to host worship services, baptisms, and prayer meetings. In Rome, beneath the city, believers dug out vast networks of underground burial tunnels called catacombs. They hosted gatherings, cared for the sick, baptized converts, and in many cases became martyrs. Perpetua, a noble woman and mother, kept a diary of her trial and visions in prison. Felicity, a pregnant slave, gave birth in prison days before being thrown to the beasts. Inside the catacombs, we find frescoes of the Good Shepherd, the fish symbol, doves, anchors, and loaves, all signs of hope and coded faith. Can they be forgiven? The result was a deepening of doctrine, a purifying of practice, and a refining of leadership. Some inscriptions are in Greek, some in Latin, bearing witness to a multilingual church. Despite the darkness, these places were filled with light, the light of courage and community. Through apologists, it engaged the empire with reason. Through underground gatherings, it built resilient communities. Through martyrdom, it bore witness to a kingdom not of this world. Women and the hidden heroes, and how the lives and deaths of the faithful shook the foundations of Roman pride. Women played a vital role in the underground church. Perpetua and Felicity, two young women from North Africa, were arrested for their faith. Public life revolved around the arena, where the masses gathered to watch games, executions, and displays of imperial might. For the early Christians, this meant that persecution was not just a matter of private suffering. It was often a public performance. Many met their end not as criminals, but as testimonies of a kingdom beyond Rome. Their story became one of the most read martyr texts in early Christianity, a testament to courage across class and gender lines. It was Rome's theater of power. Gladiators fought to the death. Wild beasts were unleashed on prisoners, and condemned criminals were executed in elaborate displays. Theology and suffering, the catacombs served not just as burial sites, but as schools of faith, where catechumens were taught the truths of the gospel, and where bishops secretly consecrated new leaders. Bodies of saints, leaders, and martyrs were placed here with honor. Pilgrims would later come to pray in these dim, sacred halls. Persecution was not just physical, it was theological. Why does God allow his people to suffer? What happens to those who renounce Christ under torture? These questions forced the church to reflect, pray, and write. Some argued for strict discipline. Those who lapsed could not return. Refusal to offer incense to Caesar could result in confiscation of property, imprisonment, or death. Faith gatherings were secret. Baptisms were often done under cover of darkness. Messages were passed in code. New converts were carefully vetted. Their serenity in the face of terror stunned the crowd and planted seeds of curiosity and conversion among onlookers. Mobs could sway magistrates. Slander against Christians, accusations of cannibalism, incest, and atheism fueled hatred. Others, like Cyprian of Carthage, advocated for mercy and restoration. Converts came not through mass rallies, but through radical love and quiet witness. Some officials began to question the justice of these executions. Christians cared for widows and orphans, rescued abandoned infants, and nursed the sick during plagues, earning them admiration even from their enemies. When she was finally thrown to the beasts, it was said her face shone like an angel. These underground burial sites were used by Christians to honor the dead, hold worship services, and escape the prying eyes of persecutors. Conclusion of chapter 4 letters from bishops, creeds, and writings were passed between communities. Symbols carved into walls marked safe spaces. Passwords and signs like tracing a fish in the sand identified believers. The early church did not merely survive persecution. It grew deeper, stronger, and more beautiful. It drew a clear line between nominal belief and genuine faith. Some lapsed under pressure, but others rose to leadership, having been refined by fire. In the next chapter, we'll step into the blood-soaked arenas and explore how public spectacle became a place of Christian triumph. Stay with us. Chapter 5. The Arena and the Catacombs' Life Under Constant Threat. In the shadow of the Colosseum and beneath the Roman streets, faith flourished. Suffering did not extinguish belief, it deepened it. Their final words, their prayers, their songs became fuel for faith. Children were named after them. Churches were built where they fell. Martyrdom was not glorified, but it was honored. They believed that no empire, however mighty, could overcome the kingdom of God. We will explore the rise of Constantine, the Edict of Milan, and the first signs of Christianity moving from a hunted faith to a shaping force of Western civilization. The same faith that had been pushed into catacombs and burned in amphitheaters was now gaining attention, not just among slaves and peasants, but among soldiers, nobles, and even imperial elites. The 3rd century saw a relentless string of military defeats, economic instability, plagues, and internal revolts. Emperors rose and fell at breakneck speed, often by assassination. The Roman Empire was not just a political power, it was a spectacle-driven society. In this chapter, we walk through the blood-soaked sand of the amphitheaters, descend into the sacred silence of the catacombs, and uncover the day-to-day resilience of the persecuted church. The persecutions under Decius and Valerian were among the most organized and widespread. Yet, even in the fire, the church endured. Cyprian of Carthage, writing shortly before his martyrdom, declared, initially tolerant, he was later persuaded by his co-emperor Galerius to eliminate Christianity altogether. The Colosseum, stage of faith and fury. The Flavian amphitheater, known today as the Colosseum, was more than an architectural marvel. Christians, because of their refusal to bow to Caesar or sacrifice to pagan gods, were among those sent into this brutal stage. Eyewitness accounts, like those preserved by early Christian writers, describe how believers sang hymns as they were mauled by lions or burned at the stake. The Catacombs, sanctuary of the faithful. Beneath the city of Rome lies a labyrinth of tunnels carved out of soft volcanic rock, the catacombs. Here, carved into the walls, were Christian symbols of hope, the fish, the anchor, the Cairo, the Good Shepherd. While not every Christian hid in catacombs, they became sacred spaces of memory and martyrdom. A day in the life of the persecuted. To live as a Christian in the 2nd or 3rd century was to live on alert. A believer might worship in a house church one day and be hauled before a magistrate the next. Still, the church grew. The role of the Roman crowd, public opinion in Rome, was a powerful force. Tertullian once wrote, if the Tiber floods the city, if the Nile refuses to rise, if the sky doesn't move or the earth does, the Christians to the lions. Yet even among the crowds, hearts were stirred. Some spectators were converted by the courage they saw. Martyrdom as witness, the Greek word martyr means witness. For the early church, dying for Christ was not an end, but a proclamation. Stories of martyrs were passed from city to city. Among the most famous was Blandina, a young slave girl in Lyon. Tortured for days, she would not renounce Christ. Her captors were amazed. Underground networks and communication. Despite the oppression, the church developed sophisticated means of communication. Bishops like Cyprian of Carthage and Dionysius of Alexandria coordinated responses to persecution, shared theological insights, and encouraged endurance. Persecution and identity, paradoxically, persecution clarified identity. Church councils began to address, what do we do with those who deny Christ under threat? Can they return? What is the cost of discipleship? These debates help define the boundaries of church discipline, grace, and unity. Conclusion of Chapter 5. The early church was not a hidden sect, but a radiant resistance. The Christians of this era left no cathedrals, but they left something stronger, a legacy of courage, love, and truth. In the next chapter, we'll see how that kingdom began to rise openly as emperors shifted and Christianity moved from the margins to the mainstream. Chapter 6. From persecution to patronage, the turning tide, in the shadow of the empire's violence, something unexpected began to stir. This chapter traces the surprising shift from persecution to patronage, from emperors who demanded worship to an emperor who himself would bow before Christ. The crisis of the 3rd century, before Christianity's fortunes turned, the empire itself teetered on the brink of collapse. Amid this chaos, Christians were again blamed for angering the gods. The church is watered more with blood than with rain. Diocletian's final blow. By the late 3rd century, Emperor Diocletian sought to restore order through a tetrarchy, dividing the empire into 4 rulers. In 303 AD, Claudius launched what would become the Great Persecution. Churches were destroyed, scriptures were burned, clergy were arrested, citizens were forced to sacrifice or die. This persecution was brutal, widespread, and lasted for nearly a decade. It seemed like the final blow, but history was turning. Constantine and the vision of the cross in 312 AD, 2 rival emperors, Constantine and Maxentius, clashed for control of the Western Roman Empire. On the eve of the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine reportedly saw a vision, a cross of light in the sky and the words, "In this sign, conquer." He ordered his soldiers to mark their shields with the Chi, the first 2 letters of Christ in Greek. Constantine won a stunning victory. Soon after, he issued the Edict of Milan alongside his eastern co-emperor Licinius. It granted full religious tolerance to Christians and restored confiscated property. Christianity was no longer illegal, it was protected. The imperial church takes shape. With Constantine's conversion came profound change. He funded the construction of churches, including the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. He granted privileges to clergy and made Sunday a legal day of rest. He called the Council of Nicaea to settle theological disputes, especially the Arian controversy. Though his faith had political overtones, Constantine's embrace of Christianity marked a historic pivot. For the first time, the followers of Christ were not fugitives, but favored. Yet not all Christians were comfortable with this. Struggles in a new era, the shift from persecuted minority to imperial ally, introduced new challenges. Should bishops accept imperial gifts? Could the church remain pure in power? Was martyrdom still the highest calling now that persecution had ceased? Some believers fled to the deserts of Egypt and Syria, giving rise to Christian monasticism. Pagan temples were closed. Sacrifices were outlawed. Figures like Anthony the Great left society to pursue holiness in solitude. Their lives of simplicity and prayer inspired generations. Others, like Athanasius, fought theological battles within this new world of imperial Christian partnership. The slow Christianization of empire, it it survived not just through suffering, but through resilience, wisdom, and grace. See you in the next video. Even with Constantine's support, paganism did not vanish overnight. Temples still stood. Old festivals still took place. The transition was gradual, but by the end of the 4th century, under Emperor Theodosius I, Christianity was declared the official religion of the Roman Empire. The persecuted church had become the imperial church. Conclusion of Chapter 6. From haunted outcasts to imperial advisors, the journey of the early church defies expectations. Yet this new alliance with power would bring its own trials, compromise, corruption, and theological conflict. In the next chapter, we explore how the institutional church began to take shape and how the seeds of medieval Christendom were sown in the ashes of empire.